Long ago, in a land far, far away, there lived a woman. More than anything, she wished for a child. Many years passed, but no child came. So the woman asked a fairy for her help.
"Plant this bean," said the fairy. "Then see what happens when you sprinkle a little magic fairy dust."
Tap the fairy to plant the bean. To sprinkle magic fairy dust, tap her 3 times more. How wonderful! A little girl of my own. The woman and little Thumbelina lived happily together for many years. Then one rainy night, a big toad hopped up to their house. Looking in, he saw Thumbelina fast asleep in the tiny walnut shell she used for a bed.
"Croak, croak,"
he said.
"I'm a lonely old toad. How nice it would be if that lovely girl came to live with me."
With that, the toad leapt into the room and carried Thumbelina away in her shell. Off he went, hop, 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 with Thumbelina still fast asleep under her rose-petal blanket. When the tiny girl woke up, she found herself floating on a lily pad in the middle of a pond.
"Don't be scared," said the toad. "Let me build a lovely home for you to live in."
Let's build a home for Thumbelina. First, drag 2 sticks to the lily pad.
Thank you. That's a lovely house.
Gazing down at Thumbelina with his big eyes, the toad sighed.
"You're so beautiful. Will you marry me?"
"I'll tell you tomorrow,"
she replied. The toad was kind, but Thumbelina didn't want to spend the rest of her life in a muddy pond. When the toad sprang into the water and swam off, she cried out,
"Help! Help!"
Well, just then, 2 little fish peeped out of the water. When they heard Thumbelina's cries, they dived down and set about nibbling the roots that held the lily pad. A passing butterfly grabbed the end of the lily pad with his long tongue. He fluttered downstream, pulling Thumbelina behind him. Drag the butterfly left or right to avoid the monsters and logs.
Thank you, kind butterfly.
"Crick, crick, here's a lovely thing,"
buzzed the bug, and he carried Thumbelina off to the tree where his family lived. But when the other beetles saw Thumbelina, they laughed.
Ugh, she has legs and arms like a person, but no feelers and no shell. How hideous!
The bug felt foolish. Thumbelina didn't seem so lovely after all. He picked her up, flew off to the meadow, and set her down amongst the flowers. Poor Thumbelina felt very sad and lonely. Let's cheer Thumbelina up. Tap on the hopping birds to sing a tune for her.
That lovely tune has cheered me up. Can you play another one?
All summer long, Thumbelina lived happily in the meadow. But when winter came, the flowers dried up and the snow fell. It was very hard for little Thumbelina to find food. Then one day, she spied a house belonging to a field mouse. "You poor thing, come in and get something to eat," said Mrs. Mouse. "If you keep the place tidy and do the dishes, you can stay with me as long as you want." Thumbelina was delighted and stayed all winter with Mrs. Mouse. Tap the ice block to make a pretty ice sculpture for Mrs. Mouse. Try again. Great, but I'm still not sure. Have another go. That's beautiful. Thank you. One morning, Mrs. Mouse said to Thumbelina, "My neighbor is coming to visit. He has a splendid velvet coat and a fine house. He would make a good husband for you." Not long after, there was a knock at the door. In came the neighbor. He was a mole. The mole was winking and blinking, for he spent all his life in his dark hole below the ground. Mr. Mole took Thumbelina to see his house. He had already fallen in love with the beautiful girl. As they walked along the tunnel, crash! Something fell through the ceiling. The mole walked past without a second look. When the dust settled, there was a swallow. Help Thumbelina look after the swallow. Tap the worms to feed him, then rub the swallow clean. Finally, drag sticks to the fire to warm him up. Thank you. I feel much better. Thumbelina looked after the swallow all winter long. At night, she told Mrs. Mouse and Mr. Mole stories and played the flute while they danced. When spring came, the swallow was strong enough to fly away.
"Oh, come with me to the great forest," he
twittered. Thumbelina did not want to leave Mrs. Mouse.
"She has been so kind to me,"
she replied, and said goodbye to the swallow. All the while, Mrs. Mouse was busy getting ready for the wedding between Thumbelina and Mr. Mole. Let's make Thumbelina's wedding dress. Tap the correct spiders and spin the wheel. Good job, but let's try another color. Pretty good, but let's try again. What a gorgeous dress! Thank you. Thumbelina wasn't sure she wanted to live underground forever.
Don't be difficult,
Squeaked Mrs. Mouse angrily.
If you don't marry Mr. Mole, I will bite you with my sharp white teeth.
Little Thumbelina said nothing, but secretly she wanted to run away. The morning of her wedding, Thumbelina went outside to see the world above one last time. Suddenly, the air filled with the sound of beating wings. It was the swallow.
Oh, winter is coming, he said. Let's fly to the land of the fairies. It's always summer there.
Thumbelina climbed onto the swallow's back, and up into the air he flew. Help find the fairy palace. Tap flies to feed the hungry swallow. Brr, winter is too cold. Don't stop. It's spring. Nearly there.
Summer at last.
Look, Thumbelina, there's the fairy palace. At last, the swallow came to the land of the fairies. Here the skies were blue, the sun shone brightly, and the fields were full of pretty flowers. Thumbelina was surprised to see a boy no bigger than herself. He sparkled like a drop of rain, for he was the fairy prince. Dazzled by her beauty, the prince cried out, "Will you marry me?"
Yes,
replied Thumbelina, for she too was in love. With that, every flower opened, and out flew a crowd of tiny fairies, smiling and singing. As for Thumbelina and the fairy prince, they lived happily ever after.